Hello, good afternoon everyone. Welcome to the GRIPS Forum. My name is Izumi Ono, Professor of the National Graduate Institute for Policy Study GRIPS here. I specialize in international development policy and then will be serving a moderator today. GRIPS Forum aims at informing policy debate by inviting leaders in the various fields. It is a public event, at the same time gives our students opportunities to join and benefit from the lectures and discussion. And I am very happy now we can convene GRIPS Forum in a face-to-face setting. Today, as a first speaker of this spring term, I am pleased to invite Ms. Eri Ishikawa, Chair of the Board, Japan Association for Refugees, JAR, Nanmin Shien Kyokai in Japanese. JAR is an NPO composed of refugee protection experts. It provides comprehensive assistance for individual refugees coming to Japan from the critical stage, like immediate after their arrival, until they can lead a self-supporting life. Unfortunately, we live in a world where a violent and protracted conflict continue to increase, causing great human suffering. According to UNHCR, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, the number of the people forced to flee from home countries surpassed 100 million last year, a quite shocking number, equivalent to 1 among 80 persons in the world. What can we do? For long, Japan has been criticized for a low rate of refugee acceptance and its rigid screening process. Yet, there are people and organizations which have been working very hard to improve the situation so that all refugees fleeing to Japan can be accommodated and settled down with hope. JAR is one of the pioneering NPOs with high reputation. What are the refugee situation in the world and Japan? What are the experience of supporting organizations in Japan? What are the challenges to be tackled and the way forward for Japan? Today, we will learn and think together these very important issues with Ms. Eri Ishikawa. So let me introduce her. Ms. Ishikawa became interested in refugee problems when she was a university student and learned about Rwandan civil war in 1994. She joined the launch of JAR in 1999 and in few years later became its staff. In 2008, she assumed the position of Secretary General, and since 2014, she has served as a chair of the board. It is worth noting she was involved in the revision of Japan's first refugee status law. And apart from NPO activity, she writes and gives lectures in various occasions. So let's welcome Ms. Eri Ishikawa. She will speak about refugee problem protection in Japan, challenges and opportunities for about 45 minutes. Then we will have panel discussion inviting GRIPS faculty members. If time allows, we will have open Q&A session with a wider audience. And we will record this presentation and discussion, and then later we will make it available in video. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ms. Eri Ishikawa.
Minasan, konnichiwa. Good evening. Thank you very much for inviting me to this great forum. I'm really honored and happy to be here to talk and think and discuss with you about the refugee protection in Japan. So let me start. So today's contents, I will talk about mainly 4 things in 45 minutes. First, what is refugee and refugee situation around the world? And the second, situation of refugees in Japan. And now, in the diet, draft revised Immigration Control and Refugee Recognition Act is being discussed. So I will touch upon that issues later in this session. And third is about activities of us, Japan Association for Refugees, one of the NGOs in Japan working for refugees. And finally, our fourth point is about what we can do. I really would like you to join the discussion later by question and answers. And let me introduce myself. At first, as Ono Sensei has really introduced me very well, but let me speak by myself as well. So when I was a high school student in 1994, almost 30 years ago, I encountered a Rwandan civil war. And I was really shocked. I was only watching TV and reading newspapers on these issues, but I was really shocked by two things. One thing is about the citizens and neighbors labeled as Tutsi or Hutu suddenly and killed each other based on their race. That was really shocking to me. And it is said that as much as 1 million people's life being claimed, being lost for the civil war. And another shocking thing to me is that the refugees who are the survivors of the genocide fled to the neighboring countries and sought protection there, but their life being lost because the aid is not efficiently delivered to them. It was said that one of the first mass influx of refugees after World War II, and the international communities, including United Nations and international organizations and NGOs, could not respond so swiftly to that mass influx. I was so shocked. So many lives have been lost for the civil war. And I really wanted to become one of the solutions of the problem. I wanted to do something to be part of the solution to the plight of refugees there. And I knocked the door of Amnesty International Japan, and I started to volunteer there. And I was assigned to a receptionist at that time on voluntary basis once a week. I sit down at the front of Amnesty International and took the phone and arranging the mails. And usually I got phone call from English-speaking person to contact a certain Amnesty staff member. And I later on soon realized that they are the refugees coming to Japan and sought protection there. So I was shocked that because I really decided at that time that someday I would like to go to Africa and Rwanda and the neighboring countries and help refugees there. But in reality, the refugees are in front of me in Japan and sought protection in Japan. So I realized that this is something that I, living in Japan, people in Japan can do for refugees. So I started to join the activities that to assisting refugees, and later on, together with the Amnesty staff and then volunteers and then other stakeholders, including lawyers, we established JAR, Japan Association for Refugees, in 1999. And I became staff since the year 2001, and became Secretary General since 2008, and become chair of the board since 2014. That's my story. It's really a small story, but started to encounter with the Rwanda genocide more than 30 years ago, and keep working, and then decided to work for refugees and keep working for it. So I'm somehow proud of myself being really continuously doing what I decided to dedicate for. Yes. And let me introduce what is a refugee, who is a refugees, and a refugee situation around the world. So before explaining the definitions of refugees, let me show you one video with it. One video, okay? So this is a city called Homs, the third biggest city in Syria. in Homs, since the year 2011, a severe demonstration happened against the Assad regime, and there was a severe fighting there. And that distracted building areas lasts as long as 5 kilometers, and only this region, as much as 2,000 people being killed because of the civil war. And in addition, there is no freedom of speech on human rights in the Assad regime, and Assad regime arrested and tortured such people who stand up to protect the human rights against the Assad regime. And so many people's lives being lost during the civil war. But not only that, such torture and attacks for civilians claimed more than 10,000 civilians' lives. So freedom of speech and the claim that democracy is needed to believe what you believe in is really difficult in many parts of the world, and the refugees are the people who are fleeing in such in conditions. And when we talk about refugees, we often talk about the numbers. We talk about the situation, general situation of the countries, and we talk about really general things, and which often seems that it's really far from our daily lives and far from our society. And in the person like me living in Japan, we sometimes feel about talking to a very different world, but it's not. There are individuals who are lost their lives in war, or lost their lives by being tortured. There are individuals behind the word or behind the numbers. So let me introduce one family. Let me say Mr. A in the left. Right from you. He was born and brought up in Syria and joined the demonstration anti-Assad regime. And because of that, secret police is trying to arrest him. And he tried to escape out of Syria and going to Europe for protection. But in the end, he could not reach Europe, and he decided to apply asylum in Japan. And half a year later, after he applied asylum, the government of Japan rejected his case, but gave him the humanitarian status, just a residential permit. Does not lead to any rights, especially bringing his family to Japan. So he really working hard since then. He often visits our office and then really claim our staff, please promise and please tell me when I can bring my family to Japan. I really remembered his face coming to Japan, a really serious face, and then claiming to my colleagues. And finally, his claim being somehow heard in various stakeholders and parliamentarians and then government officers and then NGOs like us really worked to enable his family to come to Japan. And finally, at the Narita airport, after 2.5 years, he's leaving his own country, he could reunite with his family. This is the picture of him finally brought together with his family. So when we talk about refugees, we often talk about the politics or numbers or law or systems, etc. But refugees are the people and individual lives. So I really would like to remind always in my presentation that when we talk about refugees, we talk about the people, individuals. But we have to talk about numbers as well. As Professor Ono says, that there are over 100 million displaced population around the world. And the UNHCR, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, says that this must not be happen. But in reality, the numbers of refugees who lost their homes and have to seek protection in other countries or forced displacement survivors, numbers are really increasing at this moment. And in May each year, the UNHCR releases the updated numbers of the displaced population around the world, and I guess, I'm afraid that the numbers would increase more than 100 million this year. It's really serious, but it's serious and it must not happen, but it's really going on in reality. And I would like to share with you various forms of human mobility, migration. This is the chart made by IOM, International Organization for Migration. And when you see the left side, it's voluntary migration. And when you see the right side, it's involuntary migration. I'm sorry, it's only in Japanese. But voluntary migration is like trip to the other countries and a business trip and international students like many of you are staying here, and a family reunification. And involuntary or forced migration is that lack of opportunities, poverty, natural disasters, and environment destruction, and also war and persecution and human rights violation is the most severe types of unwilling or forced migration. But please be noted that they are really connected in a gradation. So sometimes refugee can be international students and then coming to Japan and would like to study about Japanese or more advanced studies. Or sometimes refugees can be really skilled IT programmer and would like to go to other countries for keeping up his career. So it can be really mixed. So sometimes in Japan, that why the refugees are willing to work or why refugees are willing to study, such questions are sometimes brought to us. But the question itself is wrong, I think. They can be coexistence, such mind, fleeing his own country and willing to be successful in his career or in academic career can be coexistence in one person's mind. So migration is really connected and in gradation. So please, I would like to show that picture when we talk about migration or forced migration or refugees. And I also would like to introduce a reason to flee their own country. For refugees, each people has different claims and different reasons to flee their countries. We cannot say the person is coming from that country because the person fears blah, blah, blah. We cannot say that each people has different reasons and it's really various. But there are some typical cases, typical claims for the refugees to flee, such as participation in democratization activities, or religious conversion, or sexual minorities. Like Uganda, a few weeks ago, there is a serious law passed in the parliament. It says that criminalizing LGBTQ identity. So based on that law, the LGBTQ people in Rwanda can be criminalized. And that could be one of the reasons to become refugees in other countries. They have a good reason to seek protection in other countries, I think. And also imputed political opinion. It's sometimes happening in Syria, not only Syria, but of course. Some places, some region, if there are some, like for example, anti-Assad movements or anti-Assad groups are working in certain region, but the government, Assad regime, see that region as anti-government group, anti-government region, and put barrel bomb on that. So these are considered as imputed political opinion, and that could be protected in the refugee definitions. So, I picked up some reasons, typical reasons to flee, but again, I would like to confirm that each person has different reason to flee, and even if that person is coming from the same country in the same region, the reasons might be different. And we must see the refugees as individuals, persons to have different claims. And the definition, who is a refugee? A person who has outside of their country of nationality, and then they have to have a well-founded fear of persecution because of race, religion, nationality, or membership of a particular social group or political opinion. So these are the refugees definition in the 15th Refugee Convention and the 67 optional protocols. The definitions are the same. So when we talk about refugees, legally we talk about these people, but in general, we talk about refugees in more a bit broader way, like refugees are the people who are fleeing from war, persecution, and serious human rights, something like serious human rights. But in a legal context, it's a bit narrower. Please be shared with that. And I would like to show you another chart, which is made by a Norwegian NGO called the Norwegian Refugee Council. It's 2 years ago, and I think new version will come soon, but they say the world's most neglected displacement crisis in 2021. And they list up 10 countries, they are all in Africa. And then they say that some crises are really well paid attention by the world population, but some countries' crises are not, although the seriousness of the crisis is not so much difference. But in Japan, yes, it's true that the incident crisis in Ukraine last year is paid much attention than any other crisis in the world, I think. Even 1 year after the crisis happened, we can watch the Ukrainian crisis even in Japanese medias, but other crises like these countries are not covered at all by the medias in Japan. So we have to really think about what we see on mass medias, especially in Japan, are not all the conflict in the world. There are much more conflict than the media coverage, especially in Japan. And in JAR, our organization, most of our clients, like more than half of our clients, are coming from these countries, and we provide assistance to them. And in Japan, the refugees are often talked as burdens. And in Japanese, in refugees, Japanese term nanmin, in generic term, are more not really limited to the refugee definition person, but rather are people in difficult situation or people who cannot do by their own, something like that. But so in Japan, when we talk about the refugees, it's really, how can I say, well connected with the image that they have a difficulty in getting financially independent, or they could be the burden of the society. But recent researches, especially economic perspective in Europe or in other countries, shows that it's not true. They are not the burdens. In Western European countries, such as UK, France, Germany, and Italy, where refugees ended up, the financial support for refugees can be offset by growth and increased tax revenues, concluding that it is a macroeconomic plus. And simply accepting refugees is not enough. Extensive language education and job trainings are needed to boost their independence. Yeah, and one of the researchers appealed that the more the refugees are boosted through job training and education, the greater their contribution to the economy. In addition to increased tax revenues, the economy can also be expected to be boosted by increased financial spendings and consumer spendings. And the final point is that people from outside the country are more likely to start a business than those born in UK. It's a research in the UK. And this is more pronounced among those from refugee backgrounds. With the right investment, refugees could make a significant contribution to the European economy. I'm introducing this not because refugees, let's take the refugees who can be economically independent and who can be really good for the country. I don't mean that. Of course, refugees need protection. And it's the first point, whether or not their economic potential would be, they must be, once they are within the fit of they are fit within the Refugee Convention, they must be protected. They must be given protection in the country they're fleeing. But in Japanese context, refugees are too much considered as burden of the society. I would like to show you another academic output that when we invest them properly, they can be highly likely to succeed in the country they flee to. Yes. And also, and I would like to go into the next discussion point, which is a situation of refugees in Japan. And this is the framework for accepting refugees in Japan. I can say made a type of refugee acceptance in Japan. There are several types of refugee acceptance in Japan so far. It started in 1978. Japanese government decided to accept Indochina refugees at the time. And until 2021, more than 10,000 people being accepted. And soon after, the government has decided to accept Indochina refugees by policy, by cabinet approval. The government has joined the Refugee Convention, which defines the refugee that I introduced. And they set up, they revised the immigration law, which is called Immigration Control and Refugee Recognition Act. At that time, that law was called Immigration Control Act. But they extended the refugee procedure, and then now it is called Immigration Control and Refugee Recognition Act. And it's individual refugee screening, which is refugee status determination starts in 1982. And they are acceptance by law, and until 2021, only 950 persons been approved so far. And for the numbers of last year, I will introduce for the next slide. In 2010, Japan has introduced another policy for accepting refugees, which is resettlement of refugees staying in third country. At that time, the government of Japan has decided to take Myanmar refugees staying in Thailand, and later by 30 people a year. And later on, the region is widened and the numbers are doubled. Now 60 people a year being accepted. And so far, around 200 people been accepted so far. And another policy change is that 2017, the government of Japan started accepting Syrian refugee students, not as a refugees, but as a student. The acceptance arranged by JICA or private sector or the Ministry of Education. So these institutions accepted Syrian refugees as students. And so far, more than 100 persons been arrived in Japan with their families. And also last year, as you can well remember, that Ukrainian crisis happened, and soon after the Russian invasion to Ukraine, 1 week after I remember, the Prime Minister Kishida announced that Japan would take Ukrainian people, and the government described them as evacuees, not as refugees, which is really unique. and applied a different type of framework to accepting them. But you can be noted that its acceptance, the government say that let's accept or we will accept, but in actual status, the government sponsored refugees. The government-sponsored Ukrainian refugees are around 200 out of more than 2,300 Ukrainian refugees accepted to Japan. Most of them come to Japan by a Japanese guarantor. So maybe we could say that it could be a acceptance by private guarantor widely. It was widely accepted by the private guarantor. So private guarantor hosts Ukrainian refugees to come to Japan, and of course government arranged, especially making easier for the Ukrainian people to come to Japan by getting visa easily. But in reality, most of the Ukrainian people who came to Japan have a private guarantor, and because of that invitation, based on that invitation, Ukrainian people could come to Japan, and majority of them come to Japan by such way. Yes, and last year, March, one of the Japanese private company made a public opinion survey in favor of accepting refugees. And at that time, number of more than 50% of the people answered that the number of the refugees should be increased. And majority, about 58% of the people answered that the people applying for refugee status should be protected. So it was really last year, March, when the, atmosphere among Japan to protect refugees, especially Ukrainian refugees, was really high. So I'm not sure whether we could get the same result for this year. But we can say that the Ukrainian refugees really wakes up Japanese citizens' mind to accept more people in Japan, not only Ukrainians, and that movement is really important in Japan to move the refugee protection forward, I think. And this number is the people who were protected, who were granted refugee status last year. It is the most refugee protected numbers since the system started. And you can see that how small numbers of the refugees being accepted each year in 20 years in this graph. Like 2007, 41, and 2013, only 6 being recognized, and 11, and 2 years before, 74, and last year, 202. It was the really big number ever in this Japanese history, but still, we believe that government of Japan can do and it should do more to protect refugees. Among 202, a majority of them are Myanmar or Afghanistan, especially for the people for the Afghan people who already evacuated to Japan by former because they used to work for the government of Japan or ODA. So government of Japan has protected such people, and the majority of them are such certain types of groups, and other than that, there are not so much people who are protected, we believe. And this is the statistics of the 2 years ago when government of Japan has accepted 74 refugees that year, and that year was said that the most number ever. But compared to the other countries, like G7 countries, the Japanese recognition rate and the recognition numbers are still very small, and we can do more to protect them. Yeah, it's true. Well, this is the graph of the comparison of Syrian origin refugees, such as Mr. A. I introduced in the picture today, but we compared in 10 years of Syrian refugees acceptance rate by other G7 countries plus Australia. And it's true that you can see that when we look at the recognized numbers of the Syrian refugees, Japan is really small, 22. Then other countries, France is 41, and Germany is 61. But other countries more than around 80%. Yeah, there are 78. But the percentage of the people, Syrian people who are recognized is really high. But in numbers of protection, like Mr. A, as I have told, that he was rejected asylum but allowed to stay. Mr. A is categorized as this. Number of protection and the protection ratio, the Japan is the highest. So we can say that Japan does not recognize refugees, but somehow protect them by other means, just allowing them to stay in Japan. So the Japan does not send back to the Syrian. When it comes to the Syrians, Japan does not send them back to Syria, but does not recognize them as refugees. That's one of the Japanese unique way of dealing with refugees, I think. And there are challenges for Japan's refugee policies. It is the proposal by the Japanese government, Japanese NGO. And first, improvement of refugee recognition system. And we proposed the independence of the refugee recognition body. And the second, guaranteeing the legal status of asylum seekers, because asylum seeking process takes about more than 3 years in total in administrative procedure. When it comes to the court, it takes another 3 years, or average 3 or more years sometimes. So during that time, sometimes asylum seekers have to go through that procedure with their legal status, so they could be detained or their lack of financial assistance by the government. So guaranteeing them their status is really important. And also livelihood security for asylum seekers. They must be assisted to live properly. So in Japan, the safety net for asylum seekers has many loopholes, and they are really unable to eat sometimes and does not have house, does not have shelter to live. So such situation must be really revised. In our office, Japan Association for Refugees, we have like 20 or 30 visitors, asylum seekers, every day when we open our office. And they say that they are run out of money after come to Japan, and they don't have house, and they don't have money to eat. So we provide food assistance, we provide sometimes shelters and accommodation we try to arrange. Although it takes a few months for the government to provide them, and the government assistance is really limited. So we really strongly believe that livelihood asylum seekers is really needed and is secured by the government. And also, fourth point is about the social integration of refugees. Yes, there are, as I have introduced Mr. A from Syria, he was not recognized, so he could not get, but he was allowed to stay in Japan, but he could not get any integration assistance by the government as the convention refugees or other resettled refugees are provided. So, but as we have seen in a presentation that when we invest refugees, they can really get independent and likely to succeed in financially. So our investment, which means that language training and job training is really needed in Japan, but quite a few of them are not allowed to do that, are not entitled to do that, especially for the people like Mr. A, rejected refugee status but allowed to stay in Japan. So such gaps in integration should be amended. And final is about fair protection measures. Yeah, as I have said, that there are gaps for the people who are refugee status or humanitarian status. Their assistance is needed and it should be amended. So let me introduce asylum procedure. First, they go to the for refugees, they go to the immigration and apply for refugee status. Then primary procedure is done by Immigration Control Agency, Immigration Service Agency, yes. And they examine the case and then come up to the conclusion that recognized or not recognized. Then, if not recognized, they can appeal to the next stage. And again, it's considered within an immigration agency with the refugee education counselor's opinion. Based on that, they come up to the conclusion again whether to recognize or not recognized. And then, excuse me, and then they got their appeal rejected. They can bring their case to the court. When the case is brought to the court, it sometimes takes about like 2 years, 3 years at the district court, and then again another several years at the high court. We have a case 2 years ago who got recognized at the Tokyo Court of Appeal, and it took him about 10 years in total. And this part, approximately 3 years and then 11 months, almost 4 years, it takes in immigration administrative procedure, and it takes another years for the lawsuit. So we can say that it takes very long years to get granted or get result for refugee status in Japan. And the refugee situation in the corona disaster, we can say that it's a spread of impoverishment. Most of the asylum seekers are working in really fragile conditions, and like working in a hotel or restaurant, their jobs are really decreased or sometimes cut, and yes, they face unemployment, and there are high risk of infection at the time of it's really English is strange, but they have a risk of infection, so we are really difficult in reaching to them in reality. But we try to contact them through emails or telephones, or sometimes and then sending food to them. This is the food package we kept sending to them. By doing so, we try to save their lives in a corona disaster. But not before corona disaster happened, the refugees in Japan faced the difficulties such as unstable legal qualifications and destitutions, and difficulty in securing housing, unfamiliarity with Japanese language or cultures, and hurdles to employment, and difficulties in accessing medical care. Sometimes they cannot communicate in Japanese, or sometimes they do not have enough money to pay for the hospitals in that time, hospitals or medical institutions. So they really have the difficulties there. And children, for the children, most of their parents' claims are rejected in refugee status, and their parents become unstable legal status, and the children also facing an unstable legal status, and so they cannot foresee their future, even if they want to go to their universities or even if they want to work in Japan. Their status is not allowed to do that. So in that case, they cannot have they cannot unsee the future, and it's really challenges for them. And women themselves are sometimes really vulnerable, and especially they don't have houses, they are in a destitute situation, they can really easily be exploited. So in that mean, they could be really marginal, they can be really easily marginalized in the society. Also, risk of immigration detention in Japan. As you might know, immigration detention is really a serious issue in Japan. Immigration detention itself is defined in the Immigration Control and Refugee Recognition Act, and that act allows the indefinite detention. Once the deportation order is issued, there is no time limit for detention, immigration detention. They can be detained forever. And I remember that the longest one I heard recently, I read in an article recently that more than 5 years in detention. And there is no independent institution to judge the necessity of the detention. The other countries, like Europe, the court decides whether immigration can detain the person or not. But in Japan, there is not system like that. And the medical condition of immigration detention center is really limited. So sometimes detainees' lives being lost. And as you might know, that Sri Lankan lady's life being lost in Nagoya Immigration Detention Center 2 years ago. And it is said in a newspaper or articles that she kept saying that, please brought me to the hospital, but the medical treatment to her seems to be not proper, and she lost her lives. The immigration issued a report on her death, but says that her reason for her death is still unknown. The lawyers made a lawsuit, and now the part of the videotaped while she is in detention is released. Sometimes you might want to watch the video to know that what is really happened there. But immigration detention is really serious. Criticized in activities. I can say that immigration detention centers condition and immigration detention center settings itself, system itself should be revised. But still, recently, as I have told you, that revised Immigration Control and Refugee Recognition Act is being now discussed at the Diet at this moment. But it says that it seems to me personally that there is no really, profound revised system is not written clearly in that law. It says that some medical condition could be improved, or provisional release could be changed to other systems, but the profound system change is not mentioned in the Immigration Control and Refugee Recognition Act, revised draft one. So quite a few lawyers and activists and NGOs really opposed that immigration revised draft. And more profound reform is needed. And from refugee assistance organizations' point of view, that law has really serious concerns, especially protecting refugees. It allows the revised revised law allows asylum seekers to be deported back to their countries of origin while their claims are being assessed. That is a really serious thing to us. And especially the people after third time application or committed serious crime in Japan, they could be deported even though they are claiming asylum in Japan. But as we can see in the statistics, the Japanese refugee recognition rate is really low, and there are serious concern about the fairness of the refugee procedure. So as an NGO, us is claiming that refugee protection should be is needed before refugee protection is more needed before revising the law and asking more commitment for the government or parliamentarians for the refugee protection. And your attention to the Diet discussion is really welcome. And then we keep monitoring what is being discussed to the Diet, and then try to make the contents of the law better. And yes, trying to make the system much better for refugees and based on their protection. And when we talk about what is the refugee problem, and it's not the refugees' problem, not refugees bringing the problem, but it is the problem of those who cannot, problem of our, problem of us, problem of the society who cannot accept refugees, which is by the Professor Homma, who has passed away several years ago. He wrote a book on what is the refugee problem, but he defines the problem like that, and I totally agree with him. And we should keep thinking that, yes, how we could accept refugees and how we could live together with the refugees or the people who come abroad to Japan or who has a different background. And finally, I would like to touch upon briefly about what we are doing. We are providing protection and assistance to asylum seekers and refugees in Japan. And we have vision and a mission. The left part is that we provide individual assistance to the asylum seekers, and the right side is that we provide, we do advocate for the Japanese public and the people so that the system for refugees will be much better. And we have such support, like legal support to be protected by refugees in Japan. And also we provide livelihood support. We provide counseling and social counseling and social assistance to them. And also we provide employment assistance and community support, bridges the refugees and their living community. And also we do public advocacy and public relationship. And this is it's the kind of storage of the food of our organization, but it really need such types of food a lot in a day. Yeah, sometimes at the end of the day, such storage become almost vacant because so many refugees and clients come to our office. And we provide one-on-one assistance, and this is the food package we provide, and this is the employment assistance. We provide Japanese language training to them and match the company and the asylum seekers or refugees who would like to work in Japan. And also we bridge the community and the refugees by producing the materials for communication, especially this is the medical card, so that a refugee can bring the hospital and communicate. And the hospital can set up such tools to welcome more foreigners coming to consult them. And this is the advocacy activities, and also this is the PR assistance. And now we are doing the campaign on Twitter that not deporting refugees, but protect them. And soap and cosmetic company called Lush joined our campaign, and it's gradually increasing the attention in the Japanese community. And also this is our opinion to the government of Japan on our opinion for the revised immigration control law. And if you are interested in, please visit our website and see later. So this is our activities, and what we can do is that so many things. This is the cafeteria of universities introducing refugees meals arranged by the university students. And also this is our staffs, and this is our foods and the materials we need. And our finance is about, I'm sorry, I'm really bad at numbers, but about 2 million, $2 million US dollars? Yes, about 2 million, less than 2, yeah, about 2 million US dollars, and most of them are coming from the donations, individual donations. So our activities are really supported by the individuals who are really concerned about the refugees in Japan. Okay, so my presentation is over, and thank you very much for your attention. I'm really looking forward to explore this theme more deeply by your participation. Again, thank you very much. ありがとうございました。